this conversation with you. I know you're very passionate about this, and I thought to my listeners and followers and your own to dive in even deeper with this to really help these kiddos out when it comes to plagiocephaly, flathead syndrome, and so forth. So thanks for taking the time and to share your expertise with all of us and to really elevate these kiddos when it comes to being able to give them I don't want to say hope, but even more just to correct things so it doesn't cause other issues down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Preventing plagiocephaly and correcting plagiocephaly are two things that I am pretty passionate about. It's one of those things that we need to educate parents, caregivers, pediatricians, everyone out there on how to prevent it and then how to correct it.
So from your world, how does it even begin?
So plagiocephaly, any head shape, can start in utero. So if mom is really small, if baby's really big, if baby's in the birth canal for a long time, if they're a twin, multiples, that head shape can start changing in utero. Most of the time, we see head shapes changing. Can you hear that church bell? Sorry, that was really loud. It's going to ring for the next, I don't know how long.
I love
Maybe
it.
we're good.
It's all part of it.
It's fine. Anyway, so plagiocephaly typically starts to happen within that first month or two of life. What we have seen is that with the SIDS campaign, so the Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, the campaign to help prevent that was the back to sleep. So we're putting our kids on their backs to sleep for sleep safety, but then they're not playing on their side or playing in tummy time to offset all of that pressure on their head while they're laying on their back to sleep. So when you add in a swaddle, if you add in the snoo, if you add in a DockATot, the swings, the car seats, and all those things that keep our babies contained, they're still just getting pressure on that one spot of their head. So the more and more pressure that they have on one spot of the head, the flatter and flatter that head's going to be. And so a lot of the times when I'm seeing kiddos, I do all in-home visits, so I get a really good chance of seeing where baby sleeps, what equipment they're using, and then can help start changing that head shape by changing just the equipment that mom and dad are using.
I know, and it's one of the things where, in today's society, we're keeping them more and more in that on their backs and having their head pressure so much more that it just continually will, as you said, more pressure over time. It's going to lead to one of those things. Because I know from my world, a lot of times too, like positional plagiocephaly, which is very common, because I was doing some research for fun, and it was like 47% of kids experience plagiocephaly or flathead syndrome in some way, shape, or form. It was like 46.6%. And I was sitting there and I'm just like, that's a lot. That's way more than I was expecting. Because in my world, what I noticed from flathead syndrome is we'll see it where with everything you shared, of course, but on top of that, it would be like the birth process and what they go through. 95% of kiddos, there was research done by Chiros that 95% of kiddos will have some sort of, we call it a subluxation, but misalignment in the neck, primarily at C1. And C1, when it gets misaligned, the rotation now is not where it needs to be. So they'll favor that one side most of the time. And for me, it's always been a great thing to show parents this, because when it comes to looking at the head when they have the hair starting, or if they have hair already, I can look and you can see the bald spot, and you'll see more favored on one versus the other. And then I'll tell mom, I said, well, how I said the baby's tilting the head one way, and we're not talking about torticollis, just normal. I guess you can call this minor torticollis, but it's really just a normal head tilt that they're going to favor based on the positioning of the neck and how the skull sits on C1 in that relationship. And it's one of those things that I can show them. Look, you see the hairline here. This is look at the fading here versus here. So they're favoring this way more, and all that sitting that they're doing, all the stuff that they're apt to. And then I'm like, the key thing that is like over time, we can see there where the hair starts to fill in. And I say, see, we're not rubbing as this area anymore. It's starting to get a little bit more balanced. So that's where we're filling that in. And of course, the head shape goes and corrects too and stuff like that. But most in my world that I've seen, it's always going to be birth traumas in utero. And then we'll see it where the whole birth process itself, just depending on what shows up, that C1 plays a huge critical role.
Yeah. So the technical definition for torticollis is when there's a head tilt and a rotation. So a lot of these kids that start out with a head tilt, that's when that muscle is going to get shorter and tighter and go into that rotation. So if we're not figuring out all of these things on top of each other, we can fix one problem, but maybe not fix both. Or we can fix this problem and then not the other. And so working together as a PT Chiro team really makes sense because we can address both the neurological and the musculoskeletal issues that are coming up due to or causing a head shape.
Totally. And that's what it's one of the things, especially even the chronic, the developing, like, because a lot of times parents, who I try to explain too, is like the brain development side is happening so fast. I mean, I don't know if this is accurate, but I always say it's like 15 to 30 times faster than what we are processing. And it's probably even faster than
probably.
that. And so I'm like, 1 week goes by, that's like 30 weeks of our conditioning, And so it's like, if we don't get in sooner, then it becomes a more of a chronic issue. And like you were saying, I'll start with a head tilt this way, and then eventually it's going to do this as we're shortening that muscle up. Because the body, from how we look at it, is just how the body is with positioning. And if we don't work on both sides, right? Because I love the neural side from what Chiro can do, but then there's also, I love the PT side too, because we can really break down the conditioning. Because just like in chiropractic, when I work with adults, I always tell them, neurologically, we could change things very fast. Your brain's going to adapt 84 days minimum to change a habit. It's all this different stuff. I'm like, we can do that. The body, on the other hand, different story. That takes a little longer because the body's stubborn. It's been conditioned. How many years has this been going on for? So sometimes when we see, because I know you've seen it too, and we can talk about this. I love to bring this up too, like the importance of early intervention as quick as possible. Because I know I've heard your reels and stuff. You shared some stats and stuff like that on there. So I know this would be great to share, but it's the importance of that, because even if it's just a month that goes by or 2 months that go by, that's drastically a lot more conditioning to the body. Because I've worked with torticollis and all these different things, but with plagiocephaly specifically, it's like, even from my experience, the earlier we get, it's great how fast things just change so much quicker. But when I see like a 5, 6 month or 4 month old mom comes in and goes, next week I have an appointment, like, you're going to put a helmet on my baby and I just don't want to do it. And I'm looking at her and go, cancel the appointment if you can. Cause I'm like, this is going to be a process. It's 4 months. Or you get a 6 month old like that. And then I'm going, all right, here's the PT I'm going to recommend for this. You're going to be seeing me. This is going to be a longer process than I can imagine. So love to hear your side of these things.
Yeah. So within the first couple weeks of a baby being born, during that first few weeks of life, their job is to just eat, sleep, and poop, right? So when we're looking at those babies, they might have a wonky head shape that will correct itself. And you can hear a lot of pediatricians say, just wait and see. During that first month, that can be okay. But I don't like to wait and see. That is kind of my slogan. And if you don't want to wait and see, come see me. So between birth and about 4 to 5 months old, that is your prime time for physical therapy when you have a head shape issue. So the way that PT can come in and help with head shape has a lot to do with positioning. So like I said earlier, if we're sleeping on our back hours and hours during the day and hours at night, we need to start counteracting that positioning. So doing tummy time, yes, it's beneficial. Sideline play is also beneficial to help prevent the plagiocephaly. But if it's already started, we need to be doing something else. So if we're putting pressure on this side of our head, so let's say the right side of our head, and that's getting flat, We can't fix that unless we're putting pressure on the other side of the head. So we need to take that flat spot and get all the pressure off of it so that it can not get more flat. And so with PT, the way that I do that and that I was trained is doing that while they're asleep. If they're sleeping an 8 or 10 hour stretch, hopefully by 3-4 months old, then we can do, I'll take a towel roll and I'll put it in the swaddle and then put the baby on the towel in the swaddle. So that instead of that baby laying flat on their back with their head turned to their preferred side, they've got maybe half an inch or an inch of support that's going to tilt them onto their other side so that they're off weighting that flat spot. Those are things that I'm not telling you to do when you're learning it on an Instagram live, okay? That is not something that mom and dad and caregivers need to try to figure out for themselves. That is definitely a call me, do a PT evaluation thing. Because even if we do it the exact right way, I had a baby for a week, and within that week, that flat spot switched to the other side. So that is how malleable these little skulls are on these little babies. Within a week, we had completely rounded out one side and flattened the other. So we had to switch that game plan real fast.
I hear you on that one. That's why, like, even when because I do a lot of, I'm trained in cranial work to do for infants and kids and even adults, and it's one of those things where, like, I don't touch until like maybe after the first month, then I'll get into it, and you can do those kind of things. But I like that the whole thing about the sleep. You're basically saying, telling everyone, don't go look on YouTube and figure out how to look at that and say, oh, this is all I have to do, and that's it.
Right. It's going to be very individualized to your baby and what exactly is going on with them. Yep.
It's one of the things I love working with peds because it's always when I put plans together, it's always like I say a touch and go because it's one of the things like we're going to go a certain direction. This is how I know neurologically we're going to go. But then there's the what's going to come up along the way that we may have to course correct if needed. Like you were just sharing, we're doing this, and this is usually what works. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, no, we got to course correct here.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of it, because kids, as a parent, as you know, kids keep us always on our toes. And I think as a practitioner too, it keeps us on our toes in some ways. But that's something I noticed too, where, like, again, coming back to the whole, that C1, I mean, it's just a big area that we really focus on. And it's just a big area for a lot of things. It's a regulator for the vagus nerve and all this other stuff, but it's helping in that rotation component to be more equalized. And just for people listening, not even just with plagiocephaly, it could be breastfeeding and favoring one versus the other and not wanting to, or not wanting to turn that way. And they get very frustrated, or they're breastfeeding on one side and all of a sudden they're like, I'm done. And they tire out. And it's like, what happened? They're supposed to be eating here. Why are they falling asleep? And it's just exhaustion. And so much more. But so, it is one of those things that you were sharing too. It's like, when we're looking at these processes, it's correcting and using different tools. That's why, again, coming back to all the things, like checking all the boxes that you can do to help your kiddo in that process. It's not just one and done. It's how can we look at every facet so that we know that we're addressing all of them and making sure we're helping that kiddo be the best that they possibly can be and getting everything that we can possibly think of.
Absolutely. And there's, when we're looking at head shape, there is research out there that's showing now that it is affecting your brain's ability to communicate with the rest of your body. So there's a research study. It was actually just released in February of this year. It focused on scaphocephaly, which is the narrow head. And that one, they were talking about the differences in vision and hearing in those kids and how that was affecting them because of their head shape. So if we're not catching these kids early enough through PT and Chiro, then we can start looking at helmets when we're a little older. The sweet spot for a helmet is still about 7 to 10 months of age. And then after that, there's really not much you can do. And so the importance of catching these kids early so that we can prevent some of these vision changes, hearing issues that you can have later is really important.
Yeah, it's one of those things in the most infants, because I'll share a couple things. So like back in the Mayan era, when people say, "Well, we're talking about Plagiocephaly. Why is he bringing up Mayan stuff?" But you were talking about learning and brain stuff. And
Yeah.
what the Mayans did back in their time is if you were a priest, they shaped your head a certain way. If you were going to be a mathematician or a scientist, they shaped your head more square like. And I forget if you were a common person, I forgot what they did with that one. But anyhow, I remember those two at least. But when you look at brain centers, mathematicians and scientists use more lateral aspects of the brain. So if you square the top off, they can use more of this, and that allows that to grow more. So I'm like, way back when they knew that somehow. But it's really cool.
Yeah.
Even with all the kids that I work with, every infant and every pediatric, every kid at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, depending on what they have going on, we use cranial work to do that on top of the chiropractic, because we say in chiropractic 80% of the subluxation or that miscommunication that's going on is actually above the spine, not below the spine. And so when we're using cranial work, then we can release these certain pressures or certain imbalances in the skull, because their skull moves. It's very even as adults, even as 70, 80 year olds, we used to have they used to think back then that it was all fused together by the time you're like 70. Well, they found out that's not true. It still moves even that day. And so when we're breathing, our skull should move in a certain rhythm, in a certain process. And there's blood circulation and flow that goes through that area. And so like there's those bells. I love it. When you have
Yep.
certain kiddos you're working with who are maybe, it could be plagiocephaly since we're talking about that. There is a lot of correlation to how we can help with the rotation of that skull. There's just so much we can go on with it. But to tie what you were sharing with the research, it is when we do cranial work, it allows for opening up to get better circulation to those specific areas of the brain right underneath whatever the cranial work that we're doing. And it's a game changer, because I've seen it in my own office. I've seen it this is what got me so much more wanting to know more about peds, when I used to use, we were just talking about this before we came on, specific technology like Insight and stuff like that. And we would hit certain really good marks on things, but then we would see some stuff that just wouldn't clear. Like kid was still very maybe not hyperactive, but we didn't get it to the level I expected it to. Nerve scans showed everything was great, but I was like, there's something missing. And then when I started getting into cranial work, I'm like, aha, that's it. That's what I need to mix into this. And there's other things too that actually gave me more ahas, because I'm like, oh, maybe it's not just the cranials. Maybe it's also, I'm finding out primitives and posture reflexes are still going on. So it's all these other things that come into the mix, and you're like, oh, there's a lot of work here to do. But it was cool then, because you do that work and all of a sudden then you see the shift and you're like, this is cool and crazy at the same time, but very cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that worked. I liked it. So
Yeah. And, speaking of postures and reflexes, if you have a head shape, let's say you're really flat here on the left side. So when you're a little baby, you're going to be laying more looking to your left. Your ATNR reflex to your left might get integrated because you're frequently looking this way, but your ATNR reflex to the right might not get integrated because you're not looking to the right and rolling to the right to get there. So then you have a 6-year-old that's trying to learn how to ride a bike, and every time she looks right, her ATNR kicks in and she crashes her bike. So looking at, down the line, you can get really far with this stuff.
Oh, I love it. Now you're talking my love language, ATNRs and all that. It's amazing how many people, because I test adults with this, and it's amazing how many of them still have it retained. It's so minor. Sure. I would say about 70% of the people I test still have it. And and they're like, and because I never did this, I started doing this only like, about 3-4 years ago, 3-4 years at the last, before I ended up moving. And I was just testing this out. I'm like, well, I want to see, there's more of a correction. Again, we're trying to bring this full circle of the future of what this can all do, right? Because there's some patients I was like, no, we're not correcting the posture like it should. They're curve correction. I had x-rays and we're looking at, I'm very big in like curve correction and all this. And I'm like, we're not hitting the mark. I said, let me test these people. And then all of a sudden, because ATNR is not only just for coordination and balance and stuff like that, but there's also posture and how you handle 3D gravity. And you handle the gravity in your body handles with posture. And I was like, oh, interesting. They have an ATNR still retained. Okay, we got to do some work. And it's fascinating when you do it. Then all of a sudden things just change. You're like, there we go. But
there it was.
But even
Yep.
talking more about what you were sharing earlier too, I mean, like delayed motor skills is something that's very common when it comes to plagiocephaly. It could
Hmm.
be from crawling to sitting to walking to jumping to climbing. Those are all those things that have to hit those marks. I mean, we look at also, there's risk of higher ear infections because
Yep.
when kids can't turn, you were just talking about, they can't turn the head one way versus the other as well. That's how they release that fluid in their ears. And so that can increase those chances of those kind of things. Vision alignment. I can go all day on these things, but it plays such a huge role and leads to even colic, reflux, sleeping condition issues. I can go on, but it's so important that
Yep.
I try to teach parents this. Like it's that when there's one thing at whatever stage of development it's not like everything else is going to be good, and that's just that one thing you're dealing with. It is going to
Hmm.
just snowball until you correct it from the foundation or more on.
Yep. Yep. So I have a kid. She was 11 years old when she came to see me for physical therapy. Um, she had, as an infant, had a flat spot on her head, had torticollis, but was never seen by PT, Chiro, anyone for it. At 11, she got into chiropractic care, and they said, you need PT as well. So between Chiro and PT, this little girl, she was precious. Um, she had a head tilt, and you would tell her, put your head in the middle, and she would say, it is in the middle. So her vision had grown for the first 11 years of her life with her head being tilted, telling her that's where her middle was. And so one of the reasons they started PT was because she was a swimmer. And whenever she would swim, she could look to her left to breathe. But when she was looking to her right, she couldn't get her head out of the water. So it was affecting her stroke pattern in swimming. And so that's the reason they started PT. And then by the end, we had started to correct that visual where her horizon was. So instead of it being tilted, we were in the middle. We also discovered that her balance was off. She couldn't stand on one foot without having her eyes open. Um, and then we found out, after all of these things, she had an optic nerve that was bigger on one side than the other. So a lot of the issues that she was found out, or a lot of the issues that we found out about at 11 could have been taken care of back when she was an infant and kind of prevented some of these things as she grew. So after Chiro and after PT for a few months, she started hitting, her own personal records in swimming, and super proud of herself, and absolutely loved it. But this is another case of, if we could have figured this out when we were younger, we wouldn't have gotten to these crazy vision changes as we were older.
Totally. And it's like the body will always do and adapt in any way it possibly can, even if it's not 100, adapting as well, right? Like this is what center line is, but the body created a more needed to get that sensory input as much as it can. So it created more of a thicker optic nerve because of the firing versus the other.
Yep.
And it's just, to me, that always fascinates me, because even like my own stories of like, and I know the listeners don't need to listen, don't want to really hear all this, but like, as I'm what's known as like a neurological switch. And what that means is my left eye is my dominant eye, but really I'm a righty. And so normally people with that have bad hand-eye coordination. They're not good with hand-eye coordination and sports, like what comes to that, right? So the professor in a
Mm-hmm.
seminar who's telling me this, I look at him and I say, no way. I batted over 400 in baseball for the last 7 years of my career. I used to be able to hit ping pong balls with a very skinny stick. I said, I was a dominant person in the outfield. I'm like, you cannot tell me I had bad hand-eye coordination. I'm like, it's not that I don't agree with what you're saying. I'm just telling you my
Right.
experience is a little different. And he goes, you adapted. He goes, I bet you have some sort of body issue, muscular imbalances and he just started laying all these other stuff that you adapted. And I go,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have scoliosis. I have this. I have that. I started laying all these things out. And he goes, see? So point I'm trying to bring that story up is that your body will adapt in every shape, way, or form. The
Mm-hmm.
key is early prevention is going to be with Chiro and PT is going to be the purpose of to really give them that strong foundation and start so the body can adapt properly and to the best of its ability. And when you do that, it affects, because that girl you're talking about, that 11-year-old, I bet you her emotional well-being and confidence is probably a little on the high. Well, just overall confidence is probably a little higher than it was before starting.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
as a parent, when you see your kid being happier and more confident and finding more joy into something, that's got to affect the parent. Just got to. I know, as I'm a parent, I know
Oh,
you're a parent.
yep.
Just seeing my daughter smile makes me light up. So it's one of those things that it affects, everyone in the family. I always talk about family wellness. I'm like, everyone should get, in chiropractic, I'm always like, everyone should be under chiropractic care. And because it affects the whole entire family, but it's going to help, especially for that girl. And to see what's going to turn out from what you guys have been doing in the next couple of years, that's going to be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to follow her as she continues to grow. She's a sweetie.
And yeah, I love it. So as we're kind of wrapping up here a little bit, any final thoughts that you wanted to share that maybe we didn't chat about, that didn't come up in our conversation?
Oh gosh, I think we covered everything.
There was a lot here.
Probably not, but there was a lot.
There was more. There was more we could have went, but this is a lot. So real quick, for all the listeners, really quick, how can they follow you? And you follow all the work you do. You put out great content. So how can they follow you and learn more?
Yeah, thanks. So my website is milestones.tw.com. And then I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And on there, I am at milestones.tw. That's me over there at Milestones Therapy Wellness.
I appreciate you taking the time to join us. As always, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. And
you too.
And appreciate the work that you do. For all the listeners out there, if you have a child and they may not have plagiocephaly, this is a great way to get into the integration before something's there. It's so much easier to take care of things then. Or if they do, get in early. You can still get work done late, as we kind of shared some story. You were sharing a cool story there, but it just gets a little harder. I'm not saying we can't make those shifts, but it's going to be one of those things to do that. So appreciate you guys. I'm Dr. Vic with Little Light Chiropractic, and it was a pleasure. And until next time, keep rocking and rolling. And